You actually got closest to where I think it's not a solution, but at least we would know what we're working on. And from the left to the right, we've actually had a proposal, a number of us in the Oversight Subcommittee, to modernize the 990 forms. And this would affect all sorts of tax-exempt organizations, from my credit unions to a hospital to maybe someone dodgy trying to. How would you design a modernized, because our 990 form barely provides any useful information, but we could actually see what's really going on, because for everyone, the basic standard of tax exempt is you provide more community good than the value of the taxes you would have paid. That was the underlying standard. How would you change the 990 form?
It's a great question. I would start by taking a fresh look at the form and basically reconstructing it from top to bottom. I think there's some good information on the current 990. There are a lot of different schedules and subschedules, but it needs to be designed in a way that information can be easily used, and not for political purposes. I'm totally against that, but for proper purposes by the IRS, for transparency. So there could be a series of questions put on there, as I said earlier, on fiscal sponsorships. There could be, banks have a tremendous anti-money laundering and know your customer regime that they have to follow. And I'm not suggesting that nonprofits and tax exempts should do that. It's very onerous. But I think if you have some questions along those lines are, who's the ultimate beneficial owner? Do you know? If certain contributions are above a certain threshold, we need to know who's behind those. I think that's very important. So I would start from fresh, taking a fresh look at the form and all the schedules with the goal of transparency for ultimate enforcement actions if necessary and if required.
Okay, you're going, I'm maybe slightly more cynical than even you are.
Okay.
Because we've actually looked at some of these where it's a donation to a tax exempt, to a donation to a tax exempt, to a field operation that's bundling, and then another one, and somehow we see where it ends up in U.S. politics, but it's a voter registration drive, just only in the right zip code.
Right.
And you can understand, Mr. Walter, how would you redesign the 990 form, and do we need to have more of it's not just who you transferred money to, but so we need the chain of lineage. What would you do?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Certainly, additional transparency would be very valuable. EIN numbers are not always used on 990s when one nonprofit's giving to another. That's certainly an important way to help track. You could expand the disclosures for the highest paid employees, for the highest paid contractors. The fiscal sponsorships could be required to be listed, possibly with a basic budget for them, or the name of the individual who's the principal officer of the fiscally sponsored project, when the project begins and ends, and then whether the project applied for its own exempt status independently, and obviously the simple thing of, do you accept foreign money? That's the single most obvious.
Any concerns on your part between the leakage between a C3, C4, offsetting expenditures in that simple world there?
Well, some of that is already supposed to be disclosed.
It's supposed to be, but it's really hard to track.
Yes, and you're right. There are cost-sharing agreements there that are very problematic. In that case, it's probably the law that needs to be changed. I wouldn't think it's a bad thing. I mean, conceivably, just say C3s are not going to be allowed to give to C4s. That alone would be a significant thing. The big left-wing foundations would be very angry. But
Mr. Chairman, there may be an actual solution that could come out of this hearing that's actually not Republican or Democrat, but just good tax policy. Let's clean up, modernize the 990 form so we actually know what's going on out there. With that, I yield back.
It's important to us to have the intense scrutiny on this space so that legitimate nonprofits can continue to serve the American people and to prevent American taxpayers from unknowingly subsidizing bad actors that do not share our values. This committee has a responsibility to prevent foreign governments from exploiting our tax laws to interfere in our elections, fuel anti-Semitism, and support terrorism threats against the United States. Most recently, nonprofit groups have joined a push to defund ICE and attack law enforcement after receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations linked to the Chinese Communist Party. For example, since 2018, the Chinese American Planning Council has received at least $445,000 in donations from people and organizations controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. These funds have been used to directly sow discord in our society and support violent riots across the country. This has to stop. Our oversight is critical to ensure we address these abuses and proactively work to prevent them from escalating. We must have more transparency, accountability, and oversight on all foreign money flowing through U.S. nonprofits to ensure that American tax-exempt privilege is protected. Congress and this committee have the power to ensure tax-exempt status remains a tool for legitimate good work while prohibiting foreign propaganda from being subsidized by our tax code. I'm proud of the work this committee has done in bringing these issues to light and look forward to discussing them further. Mr. Sloan, your research on diseconomies of memes illustrate how state actors like Iran have used coordinated bot networks to manipulate financial assets like gold and crypto to subvert some of the international sanctions. We're seeing a similar pattern where foreign entities don't just spread fake news, but instead fund camouflaged, independent U.S. tax-exempt organizations to provide what appears to be an academic or charitable veneer to these state-aligned narratives. Given your background on tracking these, how do you address the danger of narrative laundering, where these foreign-backed disinformation can be scrubbed of its origin?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. First, you need a way to systematically identify when narratives are coming from hostile foreign regimes into our American nonprofits to be cleaned and then put through the legitimacy of our nonprofit system and put into our communities. Second, from an enforcement pipeline perspective, I don't know where that exists today in the federal government. So we need an infrastructure that we could identify these risks. The NCRI, our organization, can identify these risks, but then what do you do about them once you find them? So I think that's an issue. I think what we're finding is that essentially hostile foreign regimes are discovering that you don't need spies anymore. Basically, they're using out in the open our own systems against us. They find American nonprofits that will do their bidding. These nonprofits are rewarded with more funding, with more support, with amplification of their messages and the missions of their organization. So it's a bit of a perfect storm. So I do hope that this committee does continue to look past the politics and recognize that this could be happening in any organization, from any nonprofit in their community. And I think that the nonprofits that have kept these communities strong for centuries should remain in place. I mean, when did we start nonprofits? In the 1800s? So since when did all of these foreign countries become interested in our nonprofits, whether it's our universities, our public schools, or the nonprofits in our communities?
Thank you. Hans-Jörg Wyss, as mentioned earlier, is a Swiss billionaire who's funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into liberal nonprofits through donor-advised funds and nonprofits managed by Arabella Advisors, including things like 1630 Fund, New Venture Fund, Burger Action Fund. This foreign billionaire has quietly created a sophisticated political operation to advance these progressive policy initiatives. States Newsroom started as a project called Newsrooms Network inside the Hopewell Fund, an Arabella Advisor managed 501c3 around late 2017. The Weiss's Foundation gave States Newsroom $1 million in 2020 and over $1 million in 2023. In my home state of Kansas, an entity called the Kansas Reflector launched in July of 2020 in Topeka as a direct affiliate of States Newsroom. Since its inception, the Reflector has functioned as a tax-exempt hit piece, writing critical stories. I mean, a business operating as a business should be paying taxes. Ms. Sullivan, I know I'm close to being out of time, so can you quickly say a comment about why we should subsidize with our tax code, one-sided media coverage?
Absolutely. The problem of States Newsroom in your home state, and actually in all of your home states, the States Newsroom runs fake newspapers in all your home states, Kansas Reflector in yours. And the fact that we have news being paid for with foreign dollars is something that needs to be fixed. We should not have news networks be propaganda pieces, whether or not it's a Swiss billionaire or propaganda from the CCP.
And I want to begin by obviously recognizing the important work that charities and foundations and other nonprofits play in American life. They feed our families, they care for our veterans, they respond to disasters, and they step up where government often can't. These organizations are built on generosity, trust, and a commitment to the common good, and they deserve our respect and support. In the House, I'm proud to be the lead sponsor of House Concurrent Resolution 4, which recognizes the critical support provided by tax-exempt fraternal benefit societies. I've also led and will soon be introducing the Workforce Development through Post-Graduation Scholarship Act, which will allow charitable organizations and foundations to help better assist students in paying off student loans and boost economic growth in our local communities. Having said that, however, I think we have to be clear-eyed about the growing efforts by the Communist Chinese Party, the CCP, and other adversaries to exert influence in the United States, particularly through nonprofit organizations. And this isn't about questioning good intentions. It's about protecting American civil society from foreign interference. Transparency, accountability, and strong oversight are essential so that our charities remain focused on serving the American people and not advancing the interest of an adversarial foreign power. Beyond serving on this committee, I also serve on our Select Committee on China, which is a bipartisan committee put together roughly 3 years ago, focused on how do we win the strategic competition against China and exposing the malign activities that the CCP is involved with. Mr. Dubinsky, I'm going to start with you. As an expert in unmasking complex financial fraud schemes and influence laundering, I want to direct your attention to the Singham network, which presents a high-level case of layering. We see a sophisticated, multi-layered flow of capital. Funds that originate in Singham and Shanghai move through his private LLCs and then are transferred to a donor-advised funds, DAF. From there, the money is granted to Singham's own nonprofits that act as pass-throughs, such as the Justice and Education Fund and the People's Support Foundation, which subsequently distribute the funds to other groups in the Singham network, like the media outlet Breakthrough News or the People's Forum, which organizes protests that have turned violent. By the time the money reaches the end user, the original donor's name has been stripped away 3 or 4 times, and the tax-exempt status of the DAF and the other nonprofits has provided a layer of legitimacy to the entire operation. So from a forensic standpoint, what is the strategic advantage of using a major institution as a middleman, number one? And does this layering through the Donor Advised Fund, or DAF, make it virtually impossible for the public or proper oversight to connect the radical activities of a group like the People's Forum back to a benefactor living in Shanghai?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, when you use a legitimate financial institution or a large financial institution in the process, it adds legitimacy to the process. So if you're having a donor-advised fund coming from a large major sponsor and that money's going through, it adds an air of legitimacy to it. It's almost impossible to unpack the layering that goes on in these structures. I spent 5 years investigating the largest tax fraud that occurred in the United States to date. Layering entities all across the world. It took multiple man-hours and time to unravel all that. Subpoenas, letters of rogatory to foreign countries to get information. It's next to impossible to try to get the information to do that. And the bad actors know this. They know that if they're jumping from place to place, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, things are running through different bank accounts, it loses the original identity, and that's the whole purpose when a bad actor does that. So it's a real problem. I don't have the answer for that. When those situations come to light, you need to investigate it and follow the money. It comes back to following the money in that situation. But maybe we go back to the Form 990. Maybe disclosures on how many times you're receiving money from a DAV per year and what's the total amount coming from DAVs may give a flag to the IRS to then focus in on that charity where they could do additional investigation and see if there's a real problem. Again, as you mentioned in your statement, charities do good work, and we shouldn't put a reporting regime in place that hamstrings charities from doing what they need to do. But the American people deserve the transparency and also the confidence when they're giving money to a charity, the confidence that that money is not being commingled with bad money and it's going to good uses.
Tax advantages have allowed nonprofits to underwrite coordinated campaigns, politicize the courts, and impose costs on defendants without direct accountability. Just as nonprofit tax exemptions can directly incentivize lawfare for profit, third-party litigation funders' preferential tax treatment turns lawsuits into tax-advantaged asset class, leading to predatory and frivolous lawsuits that overburden the courts and raise prices. Both sectors bypass normal processes. Nonprofits evade democratic policymaking through tax-exempt lawsuits. And for-profits use tax loopholes to treat courts as an investable vehicle. This distorts outcomes and harms everyday Americans through their higher cost. Ronald Reagan once said, if you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. Nonprofit and for-profit entities have significant tax incentives to meddle in and to distort the U.S. legal system, whether for economic or political gain, with no accountability and no transparency. Similar to the complex business structures of nonprofits, for-profit entities are structured to operate within our court system, in some cases tax-free or with preferential capital gains treatment. Mr. Walter, you have done a great job highlighting the concerns with foreign entities such as those tied to the CCP, funding U.S. tax-exempt nonprofits to support climate litigation and other lawfare against American energy companies. Unfortunately, nonprofits are not the only entity steering outside money into the U.S. legal system. Foreign-linked funds are investing in lawsuits against U.S. businesses across almost every sector of the economy for profit. I assume, based on your testimony today, that you believe we shouldn't allow the abuse of our tax code by organizations that characterize themselves as not-for-profit when they are more akin to agents of foreign governments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would it be fair to assume that you would also be concerned about foreign-backed for-profit entities abusing our tax code in the pursuit of financing litigation?
Yes, foreign financing of litigation is a real problem.
Well, I'm glad we also agree on that. One reason this foreign capital is flooding into our courts is that these litigation financiers are adopting aggressive tax positions. They claim their deals are subject to capital gains rather than ordinary income tax rates. This allows some foreign funders to evade the U.S. tax code entirely. This is why I'm introduced the TPLF Act, along with over half of my Republican colleagues on the committee, to ensure foreign investors pay their fair share and that all for-profit litigation investments are taxed at the ordinary rate. As the committee continues to examine these ideas to address these very real concerns, I'm hopeful that we will work to address the tax treatment of both the not-for-profit and the nonprofit funders of litigation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Sutherland, the Federal Election Campaign Act is clear. Foreign nationals cannot donate to American political campaigns. However, your research shows a massive gap in how this is enforced. Foreign nationals can donate to a 501c4 social welfare organization, which can then in turn turn around and fund a super PAC or other political entities. In this scenario, is the tax-exempt organization required to disclose the identity of the foreign donor? And what are the real-world consequences of this donor scrubbing on the integrity of our federal elections?
Thank you for that question. You've identified an alarming loophole in which foreign nationals are prohibited from contributing to a super PAC directly, but they are able to make unlimited donations to the 501c4 that then turns around and donates to the super PAC. And we actually see this play out in real time with the 1630 Fund. They are simultaneously funded by Swiss billionaire Hans-Jörg Wyss and bankrolling super PACs. This happened in 18, the cycle, 2020, 2022, 2024, and it's going to happen again in 2026 if we don't stop this. And the problem is, if we've identified, is that there is no real requirement that a 501c4 on that Form 990 discloses anywhere that they are receiving foreign funds. This is a huge threat to foreign interference in our elections, and we must close this loophole.
Wow. Taxpayer dollars should never go towards things like financing terrorism, supporting illegal activity, or causing major disruptions in Americans' everyday lives. Reporting that suggests that some taxpayers are donating to a charitable organization in good faith, only to find out later that that money may have ended up in the hands of designated terrorist organizations. I think that's terrible. To hear that a tax-exempt organization that helped fund one of these groups is still active in America today is even worse. To any of you all, what should Congress do to ensure that the taxpayer dollars are not being funneled through tax-exempt organizations which support things like terrorism and illegal activities? I got 2 minutes.
Well, I think transparency is key. I think some of my colleagues here mentioned revising the 990, modernizing the 990. I also think that technology lends a hand. I know there's a lot of talk about this being a partisan hearing. There's digital footprints that will deny that. This is a puzzle that's been designed by hostile enemies, hostile countries, and they basically have the digital footprint is proof. The narratives that they're funneling through here are very closely coordinated. You could hear where they're planting those narratives. They come through our nonprofits. So it's not just the money. You take the digital footprint aside that. So to give an example of just how non-political this is, coming off a weekend of football, if you found out that a hostile foreign regime was trying to convince Americans not to talk about Tom Brady as the best of all, the greatest of all time, but instead was highlighting another sports star in another sport, popular in another country, that would immediately feel wrong to all of us. So that's what's happening, except take that same lens and apply it to our politics and our civil norms. So unless we could have a greater transparency, a systematic way of identifying that, I think the modernizing of the 990 is an excellent first step.
I can also add, that's a great question. I think that we can always strengthen the penalties on the front end for the bad actors to deter the behavior from ever happening. As you said, it's horrible that tax dollars and charitable dollars end up financing terrorism, and that's often through the use of fiscal sponsorships. If we strengthen the penalties, that can be financial penalties, that can be civil liability penalties, criminal penalties for the bad actors, it will deter them from even funneling that money to the wrong group in the first place.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I would tend to agree with the co-panelists have said. I used to ask my clients, do you look good in dark green or bright orange? And they look at me and I say, those are the colors you'll wear when you go to prison when you do things wrong. So I think strengthening the penalties where a nonprofit is knowingly using money in an improper way, I think needs to be looked at very seriously. And again, I'm not saying all nonprofits are doing that knowingly, but I think there needs to be a revisit of the penalties, both civil and criminal, in those situations.
Since 2023, this committee has worked to not only understand, but also address the improper influence and abuse within the United States tax-exempt sector. I don't think there's any doubt, and we've heard it from all of you, that right now that there are actors who are adversarial to the United States, who are exploiting weaknesses in our tax system to move money, to support causes that are nefarious, and even finance terrorism. And Mr. Walter, that's the one thing I want to talk to you on that last point, is financing terrorism. Can you talk about, through your experience, and especially maybe since October the 7th of 2023, the attack on Israel by Hamas, what pattern or what trends you're seeing in terrorist groups and foreign actors and how they exploit the U.S. tax-exempt system?
Thank you for the question. Probably the best thing would be possibly to enter into the record our report, Marching Towards Violence. And the highlight of that report is that we identified approximately 150 groups that were endorsing or supporting Hamas's terrorism in a variety of ways, and often, of course, encouraging domestic terrorism, as we've seen in this state, in this very capital at Union Station when there was a riot, for instance. But the large majority of the groups that we identified did have connections to the American nonprofit sector. Many of them were precisely handled through fiscal sponsorships by places like Westpac. So this is a sprawling problem that deserves serious investigation given the gravity of the crimes that are involved.
Thank you. And on that note, I've introduced a bill. The bill number is H.R. 6800. The bill would authorize the Treasury Department to revoke the tax-exempt status of any organization deemed to have provided material support or resources to a designated terrorist group. I do want to note that we proposed this bill in the last Congress after the October 7th, 2023 attack. And I do want to also note that it's got a strong legislative record because it was reported out of this committee with bipartisan support, and it's actually passed the House floor twice. To me, that reflects the broad recognition not only of the threat, but also the importance of protecting Americans from this foreign influence. Can I ask you your opinion, if you've had a chance to look at this bill, H.R. 6800, and whether it would be effective in preventing these groups from channeling funds to terrorist groups?
I think it's fair to say that it certainly would improve the current situation, and it's a sad fact that the attacks happened at this point almost 2 years ago, and yet we still have not done much in response.
Thank you. Let me ask you, are there any additional measures right now that you think Congress could consider to combat this type of abuse?
Well, I think a lot of the reforms that were already mentioned here, additional disclosure of foreign funding, additional disclosure of fiscal sponsorships, those are certainly part of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Dubinsky, if I could with you, looking at Treasury and IRS, do you think there's any additional statutory authority that Congress can give to help the IRS and Treasury track foreign money through nonprofit networks?
It's possible. Let me just backtrack 1 second. And the issue of the IRS, it's not just the staffing. You know, there's been talk today about the staffing was slashed. Years ago, I had a tax practice. When I computerized that practice, I was able to get rid of half my staff and do more tax returns out the door quicker. So I think the IRS needs to embrace technology, embrace AI. I think what this committee can do is charge the IRS with developing an AI system to go through this data, restructure the forms, as I said, use AI to work more efficiently, not just restore headcount, because headcount just doesn't mean that it's going to work efficiently. So I do take issue with some of the comments that have been made about that. As far as additional laws that could be put in place, I'd have to think more about that.
Tax-exempt nonprofits who are acting as fiscal sponsors of groups interfering with our elections and institutions, harboring terrorist sympathizers, and fueling anti-Semitism must be investigated and held accountable. The House of Representatives has long maintained a transparency standard. To receive press credentials in this institution, a news organization, even a nonprofit, must demonstrate that it is operated independently of any government, institution, or lobbying group. The goal of this policy is simple: to ensure that those with special access to this building are not merely fronts for hidden or corrupted interests. We see a starkly different standard for the nonprofit sector at large. An organization can spend millions of dollars to influence the outcome of an election while being managed by individuals who may have undisclosed ties to foreign entities or foreign governments. Ms. Sutherland, we'll start with you. First, your perspective of why the House would recognize that undisclosed funding is a vehicle for hidden influence when it comes to journalists and credentialing journalists, but yet we ignore that same risk when it comes to nonprofits who are engaged in political advocacy. And second, should the anti-front group logic be the baseline for how the IRS vets the operational independence of all tax-exempt organizations?
Thank you for that question. I think the theme here is that we all agree that there can be more transparency when it comes to foreign donations. And you make a great point as far as we want to make sure that our press corps is not a hidden front group for malign foreign interference. We want to make sure that someone with the press credentials is not just serving the mouthpiece of the CCP. And I think the same can be said for our nonprofit sector. We want to make sure that our nonprofits are not merely front groups for foreign governments, foreign charities, and foreign nationals. I think at a minimum, that would certainly be a violation of FARA, but I think we can go further as we've identified some really good solutions to prevent foreign donations ending up in the advocacy sector.
Thank you. I now want to move on to discuss the role of social media efforts to spread malign influence by foreign actors. Mr. Soon, your organization, NCRI, has been able to map how Russian troll farms and bot networks don't just post content, they actually game out social media algorithms to manufacture a false sense of viral consensus around a topic or an entity or an individual. Your research notes that for a foreign narrative to take root, it often requires a bridge into domestic institutions. We are increasingly seeing evidence of foreign state actors, including Russian proxies, using U.S. tax-exempt organizations to fund so-called digital advocacy that mirrors our own geopolitical goals. Mr. Soon, from a data science perspective, can you share with us how foreign-funded nonprofits serve as laundering mechanisms specifically for the Russian-style bot operations?
Thank you. Well, we see this over and over again. Groups like Code Pink or the Answer Coalition are key examples where they show up repeatedly in records from the Iranian state media as top U.S. contacts, and that's not a coincidence. That's an ongoing relationship. They travel to Iran, they meet with regime officials, they come back, and then they run digital campaigns promoting across social media that Americans need to lift sanctions and stand down. Every time they do it, they get more funding, they get more media, and more amplification online. And that was my point earlier about not needing spies anymore. This is being done in the open using our own systems. And Americans need to recognize that when they see these protests that happen in a matter of hours, mentioned Selma and other really important moments in American history, it takes days, weeks, months for people to figure out how to get 100,000 people into a certain area, or even 500 people in some cases. But here with social media, when you have these nonprofits that are doing the bidding of a foreign regime, they could be galvanized in a matter of hours to show up at a location, and that overwhelms emergency services. Emergency services are not designed to respond to that type of a galvanizing of protesters. They expect protests to grow organically and slowly over the course of a day, not have 10,000 people show up somewhere with just a touch of a button through social media accounts. So when you think about the national security threat, imagine a foreign hostile regime was planning an attack somewhere in the United States. These nonprofits that are doing the bidding unwittingly, a day like where there might be an attack, will deploy all of these groups where we'll be blocking bridges, blocking hospitals, blocking critical infrastructure, and then if an attack would happen, it would be a different type of a threat that this country hasn't seen before. So I do think it's important that we look past the politics and recognize that this is a digital laundering operation that can galvanize at a scale that we've never seen before Americans to show up and put themselves and others in harm's way unwittingly.
The lack of transparency surrounding these nonprofits, specifically 501c4s, and their foreign nationals' ability to indirectly influence elections is disconcerting, to say the least. Mr. Walter, just a yes or no question. Are FEC-regulated PACs and super PACs required to disclose their direct donations and the donors?
Yes.
Mr. Sohn, yes or no, can foreign nationals directly donate to PACs and super PACs?
I'm not as familiar with that topic, given my expertise and why I'm here. But
Anyone want to take that question? Ms. Sutherland?
No, foreign nationals are prohibited from directly or indirectly contributing to candidates, PACs, super PACs.
Okay, so U.S. citizens can, they disclose. Foreign nationals can't, period. Now, Ms. Sutherland, we'll just stay with you. You seem to have the answers here. Yes or no, are foreign nationals able to donate to 501c3s and 501c4s?
Yes.
And so let me ask everybody this question. Is this a loophole when a 501c4 can take the money from a foreign national? U.S. citizens have the right to exercise freedom of speech and association, but they disclose it in the light of day. And then we leave the back door open for foreign nationals. This isn't a partisan issue. I don't care what the cause is, but they're able to influence political causes and candidates in the dark of night. Am I reading that right? I'd call that a loophole. How would you describe that?
No, that's absolutely correct. And what we have here is that it comes down to how we define elections. Foreign nationals are prohibited from directly or indirectly influencing our elections. That means candidates, PACs, super PACs, and participating in your campaign's decision-making process. But all those other electoral tools that matter up to and including on Election Day, the issue advocacy campaigns, the nonpartisan GOTV voter registration, because those are not technically elections, a foreign national can finance them. So the solution isn't to change the definition of what is and is not as an election, but to expand the prohibition of what can and cannot be financed with foreign dollars. Because what we have here is that if there's a television advertisement that's not saying vote yes, vote no, can't use foreign dollars for that. But if you're saying that look how great Senator so-and-so did on this bill, call him and tell him a good job, that issue advocacy television advertisement can and is being paid for with foreign dollars.
Mr. Weissman, do you agree with that? That there's a loophole and that
there's some details where I disagree with.
Okay.
But with what
Yeah.
you said, I 100%
Okay.
do agree. I think you're exactly right. And the solution to that is the Disclosure Act. And the only thing I would amend your comment, it is most serious for sure with foreign nationals coming in. It is not true that all Americans are disclosing their money. Most of the secret spending by far is coming from Americans who are not disclosing and using these vehicles
and
also.
I don't like that either, so maybe
We are in agreement.
Here we are, Democrat witness, Republican from West Texas, in complete agreement on that.
Complete agreement.
I mean, we all have to be there on transparency. We just have to. And there's more work you're saying on the U.S. citizen side, but we all agree on this backdoor foreign national influence. I think look, when we have this sweet spot and we're coalescing as a body, both Republican and Democrat, we ought to act and execute with urgency.
In your opening testimony, you stated that the transparency deficit in our current system is being fueled by the growing use of donor-advised funds, which effectively strip the identity of the original donor away before the money reaches the recipient. You describe these anonymous grants and fiscal sponsorships as vulnerabilities that allow money to flow with almost no public visibility. Most importantly, you shared your professional judgment that a practical and cost-effective remedy would be to modernize Form 990 with standardized questions to generate structured data for the IRS. Mr. Dubinsky, based on your 40 years of unmasking the labyrinth of shell companies and offshore schemes, how would this shift to structured data allow investigators to use AI to flag foreign influence in a way that current paper-based honor system cannot?
Very easily. The use of AI looks at both structured and unstructured data. It can look at typologies. It can look at the footprint. It can look at a vast amount of information very quickly across a universe of information. The human just simply can't do that. When we launch an investigation, it takes a lot of manpower to lay eyes on documents and start tracing things. Properly developed AI systems can make that cut that way, way down. So that's why I said it's not a matter of the headcount at the IRS, it's a matter of working smarter, more efficiently, using technology as your friend.
How common is donor-advised fund to donor-advised fund or multi-intermediary routing, and does that materially frustrate oversight?
It does, because once the money goes into a donor-advised fund, it can sit there for several years till a request for a grant is made. And the request comes in, the donor-advised fund will either honor it or not, but most of the time they'll honor it. It goes to another DAV, it could. And so it's layering and masks the identity over many, many years. So trying to trace that becomes very, very difficult.
And in the donor-advised fund context, where does screening actually fail most often? Donor source, sponsor intake, downstream grantee, or what's the consequence when it fails?
I think on the donor intake mainly, because if it's like the AML laundering. If you only know the first layer in it and you don't know who's behind the layer, that's all you can look at. So if the donor looks legitimate, but you don't know where that donor got the money, that becomes an issue.
Right. Mr. Walter, what about donor-advised funds make them attractive to influence campaigns, insulation, anonymity, plausibility, deniability? What would you say?
Well, of course, all of those things. I mean, again, donor-advised funds were created to help encourage good charity in America, but they are easily abused by bad actors.
So this is like a structural vulnerability in our charitable system. Would you agree with that?
It is, yes.
Ms. Sutherland, how often are DAFs used as a cutout to fund policy fights in ways that prevent the public from connecting the founder to the outcome?
Thank you for that question. I think that it can happen quite frequently. In fact, just last night, Gabe Kaminsky of the Free Press published an article identifying how almost $40 million was funneled through a DAF and ended up into a 501c4 that ended up supporting Kamala Harris's campaign.
Do you see donors loading money into DAFs in election years for deductions, then deploying grants later to avoid scrutiny and timing accountability?
I'm unable to speak to the specifics of the money moving in, moving out, but we are able to identify that DAFs can be conduits for foreign influence. Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, a large donor-advised fund, does receive hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign funds.
If Congress increases inflows to DAFs without fixing the guardrails, aren't we just expanding the size of the black box?
Certainly, but I will caution that when we discuss donor-advised funds, that we must do it narrowly to maintain the privacy protections of donors who are rightfully using those wonderful charitable vehicles. Unfortunately, through the theme of this hearing, we are hearing that too many foreign bad actors are co-opting our charitable sector.
So what guardrails do you think we should do first?
I think certainly taking a look at the flow of foreign dollars into DAFs. As Mr. Dubinsky pointed out, it definitely gets shuffled around and comes out the other side. Foreign money flowing into any nonprofit sector that ends up in advocacy should be Congress's first step to fix.
I'd like to talk briefly about the fiscal sponsorship structures, which I think you mentioned in your testimony. And there was a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed by Tao Fortgang of the Manhattan Institute that I think explained very well how the structure works and how it's in some cases allowed bad actors to raise money through tax-deductible donations. And I think I want to say, and I want to see if you agree, they are often used for legitimate purposes to help new nonprofits sort of get off the ground, if you will. But it also can allow a non-exempt entity to maintain limited public disclosure, which is really what I'm working to get at with the bill I'm working on. So do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, Congressman.
Yeah, based on your research, is there an example for those listening that you could point to that would exemplify that gap in transparency?
One of the most egregious examples of the abuse here would be a fiscal sponsor that was helping Samadoun, which is tied to terrorism. I believe it was the Biden administration as Treasury Department that designated them in that way.
Thank you. Are nonprofits currently required to disclose fiscal sponsorship activity on their annual tax returns?
I think I would call it best practices. So it sometimes happens, but it is not required by anything.
Yeah, my understanding is it's not required, but as he said, they can choose, folks can obviously choose to do that. So as we're considering reforms to the Form 990, the tax form, what basic information would you suggest would help the public better understand how tax-deductible donations flow through these arrangements? Do you have any ideas?
Certainly. The one simple thing would be requiring that sponsored projects be named on the 990. Perhaps the basic budget of revenues, expenses, assets. You certainly could also designate a person as the principal officer for the fiscally sponsored project. The dates of when the sponsorship began, when it ended, yes or no to whether it received foreign funding, and yes or no to whether the fiscally sponsored project applied for its own independent tax-exempt status.
Yeah, all great suggestions. It's all about the transparency so that anyone reading that could understand the arrangement where those dollars are going. So thank you. Your testimony makes clear that if an organization offers donors a charitable tax deduction, it should expect to face the equivalent level of accountability. So we're going to continue to work on this legislation. We hope to be able to introduce this and then have it pass out of the committee and hopefully get passed into law. I think it would we want to ensure that we protect legitimate charitable work, but also close the door to potential abuse. So thank you.
Which is the growing issue that is concerning our nation's adversaries seeking malign influence into our public discourse through tax-exempt nonprofit organizations, opaque nonprofit structures, and fiscal sponsorships, which enable foreign adversaries to obtain dark influence on the unwitting public in most cases and our election systems while evading IRS disclosure, oversight, and public accountability. And as Mr. Scott Walter from the Capital Research Center said, the line between philanthropy and politics has been obliterated. So thank you for that great line in your testimony today. In recent years, we've witnessed a sharp escalation of anti-Semitic incidents on American campuses, including harassment, intimidation, disruption, and rhetoric that increasingly justifies or glorifies violence against our Jewish students. These incidents are not isolated. They're all over upstate New York in my district where I live. And they're coordinated, they're networked, they're well-funded, and we lack the enforcement rules necessary to know who's really behind these. It's also been exposed that these groups seek to disrupt and influence our election systems by proposing ballot initiatives at local and state levels using these nonprofits as cover within the United States. Elections are the cornerstone of our constitutional republic. I established the Election Integrity Caucus to promote transparency, which we need to have here, and accountability, and we thank all the witnesses for talking about this. But it seems that whenever we attempt to bring transparency to these issues, whether it's election integrity or the funding of campus hate, or our colleagues across the aisle always pivot to the partisan politics and the theatrics of lawfare rather than working on a bipartisan basis, though I saw a little breakthrough today with Mr. Arrington. But we do have credible, data-driven research that shows that campuses receiving non-transparent funding experience higher levels of anti-Semitic incidents and suppression of speech, which was documented recently by our colleagues on the House Education and Workforce Committee in their October 2024 report. When many flows are hidden, we cannot rule out foreign influence, and that's where we want to get to, especially when messaging, timing, and tactics are coordinated across campuses. This isn't a question of protected speech. It's a question of who is financing and coordinating this activity under the protection of U.S. law and whether existing IRS rules and campus oversight are adequate to counter malign influence orchestrated by our nation's enemies against Jewish students and others. As an example, and I want to address this, my first question I want to address to Mr. Walter, but I just want to give an example. In my home state, a 501c3 called Westchester Peace Action Committee Foundation functions as a fiscal sponsor for multiple activist groups operating on college campuses that individually, it's known as Westpac, by the way, that individually lack nonprofit status, lack independent financial reporting, and are not subject to meaningful transparency requirements. Through fiscal sponsorship, Westpac enables anonymous, tax-deductible donations to flow to organizations that engage in campus agitation, political pressure campaigns, and rhetoric that many universities themselves describe as destabilizing or threatening towards their students and faculty. For Mr. Walter, I just want to ask you, in your dark money ecosystem, in your testimony, the dark money ecosystem highlights a disturbing trend where nonprofits essentially lend out to their tax-exempt organizations. Can you explain to me a little bit about what we can do to solve this issue with Westpac? I only have a minute left, but you have been a leader on this with your organization. Tell us how we can do this legislatively to correct this. And I think you mentioned a few ideas, but I'd like to hear them.
Well, as I said, the Westpac operates by fiscal sponsorships, and the groups that you're complaining about rightly are fiscally sponsored projects. So at a bare minimum, more transparency about fiscal sponsorship would be valuable, and it's not currently in the law. I will say that the more you and this committee do to expose what's going on here, shame sometimes works. At least one of the worst groups at Westpac, I believe, has left them as a fiscal sponsor. Now, they just found another fiscal sponsor, but shame did something.
Yeah, and also, obviously, you've been pivotal in exposing the whole Zuckerbucks phenomenon that we talked about in the past with election integrity. You've testified that and extensively on our End Zuckerbucks Act, which seeks to restore election integrity by banning the private takeover of public democratic process. Would you think this same type of 990 disclosure you just discussed with the Samadoon would actually help with businesses or operations like Westpac?
It would certainly make be some help, yes.